Good morning, everybody. How are you? Excellent. So I'm super excited to be here, and this is actually my first day to Citizens. So for those of you who are experiencing your first day to Citizens, I'll call you my alumni or my Klansmen going forward as we take on the many years of journeys through this. So I'm really super excited to take you through multiple aspects of our product today, and it's really going to distill down into aspects of our vision, which kind of takes us out a little further, and our product roadmap, stuff that's a little near and dear and stuff that you'll be taking advantage of within the next 12 months. So as you heard from Felix yesterday in the opening, data is impacting everyone, every job, every company, every industry. In fact, people are starting to use terms like data is the new oil. And I certainly get why people refer to it as oil, because there's value to be had there. But like oil, there's oftentimes a lot of refinery that needs to be done as well to get that value. And no offense to my friends out there that are in the oil and energy industry, we like to think of it more as water. Water has the characteristics of being very clear, moving seamlessly through. And everybody needs it, and everybody wants it. And so in order to reach true data intelligence, we believe that we need to remove the limits and obstacles that are there unintentionally that limit the access to the data for the people that need it to make an intelligence decision. Until we do so, we haven't truly reached data democratization. And so what I'm going to explain today is our journey and how we intend to get to that point. Maybe the best way to convey our vision is through a situation. And so let's imagine a situation, if we will, people that are in all of our companies, and you and we're all together. When I use the collective we, it's us together. With people in our companies who are put in positions such as this. Imagine a gentleman or a lady, in this situation, let's call him Cliff. He's in a room shortly after a quarter ends, and he's hearing some good news and bad news. The good news is that it was a really good sales quarter. The bad news is that there was a lot of churn or non-renewals of customers. And they're a publicly traded company, the market is not reacting well to it, the stock's going down, a little bit of panic amongst the investors and management. And Cliff's boss looks him straight in the eye and says, Cliff, how could we have been surprised by this? How did we not know churn was coming? You need to find out how we can anticipate when this is going to occur before it occurs so we can do something about it. And you have 24 hours to go figure that out. So that's Cliff's life right there. Imagine the sweaty palms, he's starting to freak out. Like, how am I going to solve this problem? Well, he knows that the problem is probably going to be found in the data, but he's in an environment that doesn't have true data intelligence. So he's right now trying to figure out where would he even begin. All right? So the journey we're going to take Cliff through, and what we're going to do for Cliff, is the vision that I'm going to walk you through. So let's remember Cliff as we go through this. So as we go through this journey, and one of the things Kim was kind enough to share with us the other day is that this oftentimes feels a bit like a marathon or a triathlon. And we're going to explain it using kind of that metaphor. But what we really want to do is anytime you start a race or a journey, you kind of want to know where you're going. So let's talk about where we want to get for Cliff. In a perfect world, Cliff wants to be able to shop for information as simply as if he was on an e-commerce site. He doesn't know how to write Python or R or Julia or anything else. That's not his thing. But he does know what to do when he gets good data in his hands. He knows what insights to make from it. And so that's what we want to power him. We want to give him a position where he can strap in and find exactly what he's looking for, and he can trust it. He knows that that's stuff that when he goes back to management and says, this is what happened and why it happened and what we can do about it, he wants to believe that he's giving the absolute truth and have faith in it. So our job is to now figure out how to do that. Now, in the shopping experience, it can't be like an IKEA shopping experience. When it shows up, you get excited and you see the box, but then you open it up and you see the instructions, you're not so excited anymore. So Cliff needs assembled goods. He wants the white glove treatment, where it's actually a finished product that he can start using right away. Because again, he can't program, he can't do all the manipulation of the data that might be required across multiple data sets. So our job for Cliff is to make that shopping experience beautiful with finished assembled goods. And that's how we're going to get him to be a superstar the next morning. All right, so again, as using the marathon or a journey like this as our metaphor, anyone who's a long-distance runner, was one, is aware of one, might be aware that the first couple of miles of a marathon are the most important. If you get out too fast, you'll hit a wall. You won't finish the race, or you'll finish very poorly. If you get out too slow, you might get stuck behind slower runners and burn a lot of energy just trying to get around them. So getting out and building a good solid foundation to your race is important to making sure that you achieve the objectives you had when you started the race. And the data intelligence journey shares that characteristic. And so we'll go through those steps initially. So how do we build a solid foundation? So many of you in the room have already kind of started down your journey, whether you called it data intelligence or not. Let's allow ourselves to be revisionist if we have. We're headed down this journey. And one of the first things you'd ever want to do when you start down this journey is create a vocabulary. Most of you operate in businesses that have multiple departments, maybe multiple offices. You may have bought some companies, all of which would kind of were inspired by autonomy over alignment, speed over making sure everybody does the same thing, which is right. It was good for the business growth, but it really hurts on the data side because you don't know what is the actual definition of any given term until you have a true corporate-wide dictionary and business glossary to know what a term means, such as customer. Do we all mean the same thing when we say the word customer? We may not, but we certainly should figure that out before we start trying to report on how many customers do we have. So creating that business glossary is very important, and they start from being very general all the way down to very company-specific, some that you can share within your industry, and some things that are just very unique to your business itself. So let's suppose now we have this glossary, and so now Cliff, okay, he has a language at least that he can talk, which is good. That's a good first start, but that's far from enough for him. So the next thing that's important to Cliff are the key nouns that are important to the business. By nouns, I mean things like customers, suppliers, employees, products, the things that all activity kind of circulates around in your business. Without them, you don't have any context to what's happening. And if you're in a data warehousing world, these are the things that are at the center of the schema. All things kind of flow through them. And so we call those data domains. And I accept the fact that there's no perfect name for this, but I've tried them all, and this one works as well as any. So we'll call them data domains. And so this is our ability to articulate these key nouns that drive your business. And so we're going to focus primarily on the concept of customer through this journey, but imagine they could be products, suppliers, employees, or really any other noun that's important to you. So now we've got these kind of the centerpiece, the epicenter of how we're going to think about all the data and use of our data around the enterprise as domains. And we'll have attributes for them. So for a customer, while you might be able to come up with 100 of them yourself, let's think about maybe that's more modest, something more like 25 or 30 different attributes that might define a customer that's consistent around your entire enterprise. But you could have any number you want. There's no natural limit. And so these are all attributed. In Calibra, kind of a tie into our product roadmap, we will be shipping some of these out of the box. And you'll be able to use them as is, ignore them with impunity, or modify them to fit your absolute need. But we'll be trying to be more prescriptive of how you actually engage with our platform to get to value even faster. So now you've gotten your 2 miles done. You're in good shape. You've got your domains. You've got your business glossary. Now you kind of get into that 3rd mile. And I ran, and I remember one of my biggest problems was I was starting to get euphoric now. I was like, got really cocky. And I started picking up my pace a bit prematurely, and that always turned out to be a false pace. That can happen here, too. You want to run past this piece of it very fast, getting your reference data, your policies, your rules. It feels kind of laborious. It feels like you're saying all the things that you can't do. But these are really important guide rails because without them, people will start to get outside of the lines, and it'll get very confusing later on. So it really is important to stay disciplined. And it kind of reminds me of the old Abe Lincoln quote that says, give me 6 hours to cut down a tree, and I'll use the first 4 hours to sharpen the axe. This is where you're sharpening the axe. So I wouldn't rush through it. It's an important piece, and it requires a lot of collaboration amongst all the business units. So from Cliff's perspective, he has a language that he can use. He has an understanding of the key domains that he can talk through, like customers and products and stuff like that. And he also has some guide rails to operate within, which is a good first start. So this is the foundation for Cliff. Now we get into the slog. So most marathons or runs have at least one hill involved in them, and this is the big one. Right out of the gate. It's a lot of work to do this. And while I mentioned the word catalog here, don't think of it as the product catalog, because that can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. Think of it as just the concept of cataloging those things that are important to you. Typically, they're described as data assets or things that use data. So data would be a data set, as an example. A use of it would be a report, an API, an algorithm, et cetera. All right, so that's the basic foundation. So cataloging is the ability to discover and register this information that's important to you. But again, without context, it's not all that useful. You've got some information, you've got some metadata, but it really needs to be put into context. So part of our process is to go out and collect all the metadata about these assets that you care about, and as we bring them in, map them back to that data domain. So customer was the one we're working on, so if we're hitting data sets that have information about customers, we're going to try to pull all the attributes back and identify, using our artificial intelligence capability, the most like peer in that data domain, such as a name or an address or a phone number. And when we can't, we'll guide you through the completion process so you can finish the mapping. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the roadmap. But that's really good. So now you have these, let's say 1,000 data sets that you've brought in. You've mapped them to one or more domains around your enterprise. And so you have a pretty good set. These are all the points of light where data actually exists, and that's pretty good. It kind of starts the Dewey Decimal System for you of where your data is around the environment and what it really means, which is a good start. But something we're going to need to help Cliff with is making sure that he's using the right data. And while Cliff may not be completely worked up about how the data got there or where it went from there, we will, because we're going to be trying to make sure Cliff is using the best of what he can. And our knowledge of where this data came from and where it went to and who's using it, how often and for what purpose, is going to be really critical to us eventually giving recommendations to Cliff on where he should take information for his project. All right? So we call that lineage and use. And I was in a large number of customer meetings yesterday, and at least half of them, this is a big topic. It's a very strategic part for us as well, is understanding not just where data is at rest, but how it got there. What happened to it on its way there? Where is it going from here? Who's using it, and for what purpose? So lineage and use is the ability to gather that metadata that connects those dots for us and gives us kind of that video playback of how information moved through the environment, not just for auditing purposes, but sometimes you just need to see how things occurred, and you're going to find errors. I mean, how many times have you ever had to figure out how the data went from one point to another and it just didn't look the same anymore? Was it because they forgot to send it when it updated? Did they do some transformation to it that was wrong and no one caught it? Thousands of reasons why that happens, but the copy effect that we're all aware of can occur. And every time you move data, you incur at least a little bit of risk. And this is one that exposes us quite a bit. So lineage and use will help us, help Cliff be more successful. It's an important tool for us. Then we get into, say, okay, so now we know where the data is. We have a pretty good idea how it got there and who's using it, such as which reports are using which data sets, et cetera. But we still don't know, well, are we using the right one? And there's not an easy way to always answer that question. Oftentimes we find it tribal knowledge in the industry, or follow the leader. Well, someone else did it, so I guess I'll use that same data set. But why did they make that data set choice? So we're going to try to offer you some more objective criteria to give to Cliff to make that decision. And one of the things we're going to do is data profiling. So while we're gathering metadata about these assets, we're going to inspect the content that's in the fields that we're going to be mapping to your data domains. And while we're doing that inspection, we'll get basically some quality-based metrics, such as what percentage of the attributes have no information in them at all. If half the fields in a data set have null values, it might have limited value for you compared to a data set that has 100% value. It's not perfect, but it certainly gives you a directional guidance on if you have a choice between two data sets that have largely the same kind of data, which one's better? All right? And a lot of things that Cliff wants to do, and the Cliffs of the world need to do, is think through how they might segment their analysis. He might want to segment it based on age, or zip code, or other vectors in it. And therefore, in order to pivot on that type of information, it has to be available. Otherwise, there's no pivot to be had. So this will be helpful in helping him do it. We're not trying to be a quality management system here. We're just trying to give meaningful advice that can make a quick decision when you have choices amongst two or more data sets to operate with. So now Cliff has got some pretty good information to work with. He actually has a view of what data he has, where it came from, and when he has choices, which one's better. But Cliff doesn't like to compromise. Let's suppose that the data that Cliff wants isn't all in one data set. Let's just suppose that the data about age is far better in a data set that came out of CRM. but the data about zip code is far better in fulfillment. And let's suppose those data sets have a huge overlap, but we don't really know much because they don't have the same shared key between them. We don't really know. The way the customer identifier in the fulfillment system isn't the same customer identifier in the CRM system. How in the world would that data come together if he doesn't want to have to compromise? Step 7 here is a really unique entry for us, which we're calling a data registry. It's our ability to take data from 2 or more data sets about the same real-world object, like a customer, and without moving your textual data, your PII, we're able to link and match that across all the other data about that same real-world object and make that available to you as a consumable service. Right? We'll do that at the edge, wherever the data sits, and make that an exposed service that actually gives you full visibility as to where they are. And it offers the matching fidelity as best we can get it without going into too much details here, which we can certainly do at the booth down below, but it'll give you the kind of fidelity you might be accustomed to even using tools like MDM, but with no data stewardship. So it's nearly a costless basis way to create associations across your business. I wouldn't use it to try to save somebody's life, but I might use it to make big decisions about where data goes, okay? So it will have some false positives and false negatives in it, but they'll be really low and manageable, all right? So now, Cliff doesn't even have to compromise. Cliff gets the best of both worlds. But at this point, all he has is a plan. He has the IKEA instruction manual, right? He knows where all the stuff is, but he's still looking at a big box of stuff that he has to assemble for the first time, and anyone who's tried to put together an IKEA bookshelf knows exactly what I'm referring to. A brief segue here on step 8 is to talk about the demand economy. So there's about 1,000 Cliffs to every one of you, the collective us in this world. And if all of them have asks, that's going to be a lot of incoming asks. We want to encourage it, just like there's a lot more of you as our customers to Calibra have asks of things to do to the product. But we need some way to prioritize and manage. And as you start to build deeper connections directly from your side to the business without any kind of constraints to communicate, the demand economy will be a means for them to communicate to you how important something is, using a concept that we're all very familiar with, which is currency. If you have a finite amount of it, you have to make decisions about how much you'll put to it. So if Cliff has 1,000 virtual dollars to spend in any given year, he might say, you know what, I don't have any data source out there where the age is good. I want to send a request into us and ask us to go find data that can improve our age. We'll come out, one of us will go out there and say, wow, that's a whole lot of virtual currency for something I can do pretty easily. I'll take that. Conversely, if Cliff's peer asks for something that's really hard to do and only offers a few currency bucks, I'll probably ignore that one, right? So the natural flow of prioritization, the same things we do in our business, we available. That's something that we're factoring into our product as well to help you guys with that model. And of course, you can accept or reject it. It's not something that's mandatory, but it's meant to help with that flow and building this thing very organically. All right, so again, we have the instruction manual for Cliff. But Cliff, again, can't program. He doesn't want a bunch of data sets individually available to him, the bill of materials, if you will. He wants the assembled part. So the next step of this is like, it sure would be nice if I could press a button and you could follow those instructions and go out to all those data sets, grab that data for me, 1 record or 1,000,000 records or whatever, and bring that back to me. And that's what the service broker is intended to be. Using the metadata in our system and your registered APIs, we'll follow the instructions that we have built as we've guided Cliff through this process of what he needs to do, his churn analysis, to go out to the appropriate systems and pull back information. Now, Cliff may not have access to all the information that he's asking for because of access control. You may have policies and procedures and limitations to what he's allowed to, either at the data set level, at the field level, or some combination of fields level. Access controls is the process of filtering out what he's not allowed to have. So it takes it out of this return from the service broker. So now he's left with just the information in this request that he's allowed to work with, which is great. But as I mentioned before, some of the data he wants comes from 2 or more systems that mean the same real-world thing. So he might be looking at a customer, a James Cushman in one system and a Jim Cushman in another. One has good address information, another one has good age information. Compositing is the process of creating that single record of Jim Cushman or James Cushman based on the rules that you would establish, or he establishes, of how he prioritizes the attributes such as a trusted source, or the most frequently asserted value, or the last updated version. All those are kind of compositing rules he can create. At the end, now he has 1 or 1 million golden records that is pristine and trustable for his analysis. And now we've made Cliff a superstar. Now Cliff can figure out exactly if there's any data out there that tells him what's going to cause churn. We're not doing the analysis. We're providing the data that's needed to perform the analysis. We're not trying to become the analytic company. We're trying to make the analytics better. It kind of sounds like someone else's marketing, doesn't it? But that's in essence what we're doing, is we're bringing the data to the analytic that you need so you can trust it. And sometimes you already have the right analytic. You just have the wrong data. It still gives you this wrong result. You can build all the great analytics you want, but with the wrong data, you're going to get the wrong answer. So that is what we mean. So once we've done this, we now have this notion of trusted data as a service. This is something that then Cliff can post out on a marketplace as a model to get data to support that type of analysis that other people can use as well. So if Cliff has other peers, or he moves on to another job, or someone else wants to run the same type of analysis, they already have a model built for it. And so other Cliffs can go out to the marketplace and search and see if this model is available already, or if they need to create a new one. And more importantly, this model is now another asset that gets registered in the catalog and has all the characteristics that you would have and the lineage of how it was created. Where did the data that supports this analytic come from? Is already pre-built, so it's ever used to then satisfy a report. You have all the information already there in the model, so the report knows exactly the lineage of where it came from, all in one nice-looking blueprint. Right? That is what we would call true data intelligence. That's when you have the full-fledged notion of Cliff not being dependent on anyone between him and the data. He has the ability to interact with it directly, wherever it happens to be, assuming he has access. He can bring that data back and answer that question. And his biggest question might be now, what does he do with the other 23 hours in the day? All right? All right. So that's the vision. All right? So that's our aspiration over the next couple of years of where we want to get to. And we're fortunate in my time that I've been here at Calibra and talking to all my colleagues and many of you, you guys have similar dreams and similar needs to how do you empower and unlock the value of the data. And if it always has to come through just us, well, that's still good. It's far from great. It can be so much greater if we give it access to so many other people and build so much more insight. So there's a lot of work to get to that step, no doubt. While it looks like it's a marathon, most marathons don't end at 12 miles, although sometimes I've wished they do. As we continue to build, we'll introduce new steps along the way. We have more thoughts beyond this, but this is a really good major milestone we think to hit, is to serve the knowledge workers, the data citizens that are out there, unencumbered with direct access to the data. So now we get into our roadmap, what's coming soon, all right? So in order to achieve everything that I just mentioned before, that's going to require a pretty robust platform. Certainly anyone who's engaged with us thus far would say, yeah, you're going to need to do some more stuff than you're doing right now. And even in some of the previous meetings, you've heard maybe some of our intentions to move to a cloud-native based approach, et cetera, which you see illustrated in blue on the bottom. There's a lot to it. It's big investments for us, and we are growing fast, adding a lot of talent, using the existing talent we have, and moving with conviction and direction, largely at your support. What you guys are telling us is important to you as well. So what I'm going to do is present to you our roadmap, which is defined over a one-year period. And based on the way that we present it to you is the way you also consume it. So that's what this representation is for you. It depicts our platform in orange, and then our applications in green up atop. And I'll go through each of those and show you some of the highlights, not the exhaustive list of the things that are coming out in our next two releases, but I will walk you through each of them in turn. Before I do it, let me just tell you about our timeline. Excuse me. So earlier this year, we delivered version 5.6. I guess a good number of you in the audience have already moved to it or have plans to move to it or originally implemented on it, but that's been out since around the end of January. Later this year, around September, we're going to release our next version. Haven't given it a name yet, we will pretty soon. But that release will come out, and I'll share with you some of the highlights of things that are coming with that one. Next spring, around the April timeframe, is when we're going to be releasing our next generation platform. All right? Really excited about that, and I'll give you some details about that one as well. Please don't take from this that we're on a 2 drops per year basis. This is just a reflection of this year. Stay tuned, more information to come on how we'll do it, but we have moved to a continuous delivery development model, which isn't to suggest we're going to be delivering stuff to you every night or every 2 weeks, but we're going to poise ourselves to do it as often as we think you can consume it. And we're also going to do it in such a way that you don't have to worry about it. The idea of doing an upgrade, for those of you who have been with us for a while, will no longer be something that you worry about. And I'll tell you how we're going to get to that point. We think it's very important so that you can get to the vision that we have in mind. All right, so let's start with the platform. This is receiving substantial investment and focus from us for all the reasons you can imagine to make Cliff happy, make us all happy, do what the things that we need to do along. And generally, when you look at platforms, you think of a lot of the non-functional requirements that are necessary to run software. And that's true, for sure. But it's not the only thing. In fact, there's a lot of features and functions in our platform. And the best way to define what is a feature or function that's in our platform is to think about what are the features and functions that will be used by 2 or more of our applications. If only one application is ever going to need it, probably not a great candidate for the platform. It would probably be better available just in its green box that I represented before. But if it is or is most likely going to be used by 2 or more, it makes a heck of a lot of sense to make it a shared component. But regardless, because it's a single platform, all applications that run on top of it will by their very nature be deeply integrated. And that's the overall goal and the value that we bring to you is if you don't have to worry about integration, we save you a lot of hassle. For those of you that have to integrate a bunch of best-of-breed products that release on their own cycle, and you don't know if their roadmaps are eventually going to converge on each other and make things uncomfortable, that's expensive for you. It's probably a constant worry for some of you. Our goal is to put you in a position where as you get on our journey with us, you don't have to worry about it. It's not to say that it's us or no one. We still will remain integrated with any solution that you'd like to, but we believe the offer and benefit of being best-of-breed and integrated will be something that you'll value as well. All right? So a highlight for our next generation platform is as follows. So I think in some of the previous sessions you've heard reference to cloud native. And while that means a lot more than just technology, in this session we're going to focus more on what it means from a technology standpoint. I mentioned before that we've moved to continuous delivery. And cloud native is certainly rewarded by that type of approach. It really creates speed. But one of the big things it also means is modularization. So as opposed to having one big thing, having a bunch of smaller things that operate with some degree of independence of one another gives us a lot more surface area. And so as a product company, we can develop much faster as well. When you have one big thing, it gets hard to put too many people on it at once and be productive without starting to step on top of each other. When you create a bunch of independent capabilities, you can spread out into smaller teams and make much more rapid progress. So it's a great productivity tool for us, which is obviously a huge benefit for you. But in addition to that, by modularizing within a container, we now have the ability to spread workloads off around multiple resources in the cloud. So now we can have horizontal scaling capabilities that allow us to scale out under peak situations, or even scale out for customers that are much bigger users than others at some point in time, without having to buy all that expensive capital hardware to just to support the worst case scenario. It has the resilience of failover, high availability, zero downtime upgrades. It offers you all the things you would expect in a mission critical application, which is if we're going to make Cliff happy, it's going to be a mission critical application. Dare I say, survival dependent to be making decisions at a business. So we need to have all those characteristics in spades. So that's what we mean by cloud native. API first. Maybe the best way to describe this one is creating very meaningful boundaries between what we do and how you consume us. With those boundaries in place, you can be rest assured that if you work against our contract, regardless of what we do on the other side of that boundary, you won't be hurt. As a result, we can do a lot of things underneath the covers that doesn't affect you, but is better for you. Conversely, if we don't have that boundary, if we start making changes, things that you've depended on may change and therefore break, and that's painful. So we'll create that very nice boundary between what you do and how you use us with all the stuff that we're doing. So upgrades, again, are a seamless issue and not a concern. Now, we'll release new features that are on the other side of the boundary, and you'll only be able to invoke them if you do something on your side for sure. But at least the stuff you were using won't regress or break. Okay? Big part of our forward vision. Edge computing. Give this a little bit of a definition. So our overall mantra is keep your data wherever it is. Don't move it on our account. Your data is far bigger than our technology. We know that. And every time you move data, you take on risk of it decaying or certainly being a privacy or security risk. So keep your data where it is. We'll come to you. Right? So our edge compute is a piece of technology that will live wherever you happen to have your data that you wish to catalog and be managed through our software. As a virtual appliance, it will be near the data. It will make a connection to your data set as authorized with the authentication credentials necessary for that system. It'll extract the metadata. It'll do profiling. It'll build all the other information that we need to support those fantastic facets that will make Cliff so successful. And it'll bring it back to the data platform. No real data. So that sample flag that some of you may be familiar with, bye-bye. No more sampling. Because it's simply just too much risk, and you don't need it. Everything you would need on that real data will be done at the point of where the data is. It won't come back. If somebody wants to see a sample of data, it would go out through an API in a federated fashion and just present it to them there by going through the security access layer that you already have in place. We're not going to require you to have another copy. That, too, is coming with the cloud native and API first delivery next spring. And the final piece, which is not really tied to a release, it's really a thought pattern. I mentioned in the Cliff story how we're using artificial intelligence to do auto-classification of the attributes and fields within your data sets to the logical domain, the data domain. And customer was the example I offered before. That's a great one. That's a good first start. And when that happens, you make your resources much more effective. You can register more assets faster, and they can now focus on something else. That's really the purpose of AI, is take something that you kind of know how, you already know how to do. It's just laborious and time-consuming. And it would be far better done by a computer than done by you. You could do it if you had all the time in the day, but that's not the best use of your time. There's other things you guys should be focused on. And I'll talk a little bit how that can become a virtuous cycle with machine learning that observes the things that artificial intelligence can't. Okay? But we'll be looking for other things, such as how can we interrogate a diagram of lineage and find issues within that diagram before you even do, and spot them for you and say, hey, you might want to check this one out. And we'll learn by watching what your experts do already to say, oh, I see, they thought this kind of thing was a problem, so maybe I should point this one out as well, without your people having to do all that hunting through all that data to find it. So those are examples of things that will be coming out as part of our artificial intelligence play. And our deep philosophies on AI and ML is they are very valuable tools for certain specific things, but in general, they're not a strategy. They're a reaction to an opportunity to do it much better. A strategy is, how do we actually help make AI be better? And if we can create a data set for Cliff, I bet we can create a data set for AI and ML to learn on as well. That'll be maybe a tie-in for next year's conversation. All right. All right, so behind me is an illustrative demo running. So you'll actually see a cursor flying behind me. Hopefully it's not too distracting. But years ago, well before I got here, a lot of our customers were telling us, it really would be nice if you guys offered some reporting out of the box. And some of you just couldn't wait. So you did it on your own, and thank you. You gave us some great guidance and advice on how to do it. So thank you for being our canary in the coal mine on that. But we learned. As partners should, right? And with this next release coming in September, we're going to be releasing our first reporting platform. And let me explain how this is going to work. So we're going to extract the metadata, all the necessary data out of our platform on a nightly basis. We'll then transform that into an ideal format for reporting purposes, more of an analytical view of the data. We'll have a schema that supports that format. For customers that want to use our out-of-box reports, it'll load it directly into the reporting environment, and we'll have a handful of pre-built reports that they can use. And we're doing this with our partner Tableau. So Tableau's become a very important and is a very important strategic partner for us. This is one more example of how that's being realized. For those of you who are not using Tableau or don't want to build your own reports, you can take that extract and that schema and load it into your own BI and reporting tool of choice. So if you've already institutionalized on Power BI or some other tool, you can use our schema and our export to do the same. Now, we won't be shipping reports out of the box for those platforms, but the schema and the data will all be there, and certainly you'll have working examples. And I suspect the Calibra Marketplace will be an interesting opportunity for customers that share these other BI and reporting tools in common to post their versions of it that could be shared within the community, and it'll happen probably fairly organically over time. But we're not trying to become a reporting company, but we do know some really important reports that people would want to share, and I'll show you an example of it here shortly. The other thing that we've heard, because we've had customers for nearly a decade, is our user experience, while great for an expert, is not always great for somebody who's not. Someone who's more of a casual user or only wants to use it for a certain purpose. Sometimes it feels like it's just got too much in front of it, and they get distracted, and if it's too hard, they probably won't invest their time in it. Get it. It's very difficult to identify and work with all the personas that every customer would have and understand that all of them have people who just started yesterday versus people who've been doing it for 10 years and everything in between. And I don't think we'll ever be able to satisfy every combination of that. Did I do that? I don't know if we'll ever be able to satisfy that entire basis. So we're taking two-part track. One is we're absolutely going to continue to invest in our navigation and our format and how people engage with us. And we'll learn how to adapt to the way your users use our software. And I think that's a really good part. But the other part is we have to empower you, who know your personas even better than us, to build something that's fit for purpose for your users. So we have a technology that's called On the Go. Please don't confuse that with only being a mobile technology, although sometimes it sounds like that. It's really the notion of building fit for purpose frames, forms, and widgets for a specific user class. And it sits on top of our APIs and can be embedded inside of existing user experiences, or it could be a standalone form for what they want to do. Our objective is to provide you with the building blocks and tools that we would use ourselves so that you can build your own. And again, this would be something else we can envision being out on the marketplace that's developed by people who are industry standard experts or certain solution-based experts, far more than we are. We'll just provide the underlying tools to achieve that. Right? So that's something else you can expect from us over the coming years. But we're working with several customers using that technology to solve some very specific problems right now, and we'll get better and better at it. So that's our two-part tack on ease of use. And then finally, for some of our customers, we've been starting to do some business activity monitoring. It's only available right now for our cloud-based customers, and only some of them at this point, but we're tracking how their users are actually using our software. So we can understand every click and every activity they're doing through our web interfaces. And we'll know who came on and how often they come on and what they're doing at that point in time. And we think that's going to be really useful for you as you're building programs to report back to your team how adoption is going. And if it's not going so well, maybe some ideas of what you can do. And then you can do cause and effect. If I do this, am I seeing the appropriate reaction over time? We'll be collecting this so you can use it for your own personal use. The other thing that we'll be doing is, as we build up a critical mass of this, is start establishing benchmarks or baselines. At first, across the entire customer base, but in areas where we have a lot of customers in a given industry or region, we can actually start to create industry-based or regional-based baselines as well. And I don't know about you guys, but most C-level guys that I interact with are pretty darn competitive. So if you can show how they're doing against the baseline in their given sector, they can get pretty motivated. So that could be a way in which you can help build some business cases going forward and say, we got to be better than these other guys. So this information will be powerful for you, but it's also powerful for us because if people aren't using our stuff, one of two things is probably true. We either didn't do it right or we didn't socialize it right. And so it'll be good for us to learn based on adoption as well. So now let's talk about the applications. As a first example, we have a CDO KPI report, a key process indicator report. This report is one of the first of its kind on top of our reporting platform that will ship out of the box. It's offering a maturity score by department, for example, a community, and governance dimension. It'll offer actionable, involved kind of, it's not a flat report. You can kind of drill down and look in deeper to see additional information, spin it on its axis to see other views of the data. It's all the information that you would have access within the platform, but within the report that doesn't affect any of the performance stuff that's going on in the platform at the time. So they're in an isolated environment off to the side. Right? And as a reminder, these reports are coming out in our September release, and they are available we're only running the reporting platform in the cloud. Okay? But that's coming out. So you can go down to the booth and learn more details about this from Tom and his team if you have a chance. So privacy and risk is another application area for us. It was a growing focus a couple years back. GDPR was a big push a while back, had a lot of people nervous. There's a lot of financial incentives to do that right. I've jokingly said that most people aren't pursuing perfection in this area. They're just making sure they're not as bad as someone else. I guess that's a bit tongue-in-cheek. I think there should be an aspiration to do better than that. And I think the incentive for doing better on that is the same things you're doing to protect your information is oftentimes the same exact stuff that's going to help Cliff. Right? There's no real reason to distinguish between those two. All the things you need to do around cataloging and finding out where your data is and who's using it and its quality and all that is still a lot of the same foundational stuff that Cliff needs for his stuff. So you kill two birds with one stone if you think about it the right way, which is why it's based in our platform as well. We see that there's no need to try to do this stuff twice and maybe have different answers. That would be catastrophic, right? So the way we think of privacy and risk is, again, a platform atop a platform. So privacy and risk by itself is not a thing, but it's built to then bring in any new regulation that develops, like GDPR, upcoming is CCPA. There will be other ones, Colorado, Brazil, India. Around the globe, I think this trend is going to grow faster and faster, build momentum. Pretty soon, everyone's going to have, and we'll probably do it at the federal level. The need to be able to react to this quickly and inexpensively is going to be important. It'll be a differentiator for you. Can you imagine every year you have to have a panic moment like you did with GDPR, and now you got to do it with CCPA, and then what's next? So the platform is going to allow you to plug these new rules in very quickly. We may not be the ones who are rolling out all these capabilities. They might even outpace our ability, but as a platform, it makes it possible for our partners who spend a lot of time and energy on it to plug them in as well and give you instant ROI when you're using our platform. Right? The other thing that's important about it is it's now going to be a content repository. So working with our partners who actually develop content around these regulations, they'll be able to easily import and manage their content in the environment. And we can tell you more about that later. But the big thing that I wanted to talk about coming up in September is CCPA. So the team is working feverishly on this. It goes into effect in January. The teeth, I think, come out in June. So everyone should be thinking about how they get ready for this. Our view on CCPA is not too different than GDPR, but it's going to be more complete. So GDPR was treated more as an add-on or accelerator when we first brought it to market. We're productizing it. And so all the things that come with being a product now get enforced. You won't have concerns over whether it needs to work with this or work with that. It'll just simply be dependable. It'll also have the characteristics of content as well, so that you can bring content in. And these different regulations will interoperate very nicely together. They won't conflict with each other. They'll work in concert with the other. So you can work with one, you can work with both, or all. All right? So that's the basic characteristics of what we're going to be delivering this September. And we'll have some live demonstration capability for you or later in the summer, the July timeframe, that for those of you who want to raise your hand and see more about it, we'll be able to set up meetings for you. So now we move into catalog. This is a good, fun topic. One of the tenets of our catalog that I think is a bit differentiating is that it was built on top of governance as a foundation. All those first 3 miles that I talked about. Not everybody does it this way, and sometimes people love to get to the catalog very quickly. You know, they want a button that just goes out and scans everything and brings it back and throws it into the catalog, which feels a little bit like a deja vu of how some data lakes got started several years ago. Our thought is that maybe a more disciplined approach to putting data into the catalog might provide greater benefit. To each his own. But we do think this is a differentiator for us, is that our catalog sits atop the governance, as far as you want to take the governance anyway. But there's a lot of really cool features that we're bringing out on catalog as it matures, and you guys have been informing us of what's important, some of which I mentioned in the vision piece with Cliff. But let's talk about the key one first. So I've mentioned this auto classification piece. Probably the most common feedback we've received from our customers that are using catalog is it's quite laborious to map every single attribute that comes back from every data set to its glossary value or its classification. It takes a lot of time, slows everybody down. Completely agree. So last year we started working on our first AI that we were going to bring to market. And we've been training this thing rigorously since, and we'll be releasing it in our September release. The intent is, as we're gathering information about your data set that you wish to catalog, we're inspecting the contents of the fields that are in that data asset, and from there we're identifying tags that uniquely identify what it is. At the most basic level, is it a date? Is it an integer? Is it a varchar? What is it? But then more specifically, what kind is it within those? To the point where we could eventually map it to a very specific high-fidelity attribute in the data domain. When it can't do that, it can't get down to one solid recommendation, it'll push it through a guided stewardship process. So your stewards can say, okay, I couldn't get it down to the one, but I narrowed it down to this few, which makes it a much easier decision for them to make. And once they make that decision, that's data. That data basically serves supervised learning for our machine learning. That's data that Thou tells us the next time we encounter something like this, we have at least a little bit more information to perhaps offer more fidelity in our tagging. And that virtuous cycle will continue and get better and better and better. And with your help, persistence and patience, it will eventually graduate from being in 2nd grade to 12th grade to eventually having a PhD. But it takes investment for this stuff. There's rarely silver bullets to do this. And I don't know where it'll actually begin, and I guess it'll be somewhat in the eye of the beholder. But working with you, our intent is to be highly focused on this capability and make that a virtuous cycle of improvement. Okay? Last 3 points that I wanted to make about catalog as we kind of wrap this up is profiling. So one of the things we did make available earlier is profiling, and its challenge is the limit to the amount of data that can be in a data set for its profiling before it runs out of memory. The logical thing is, if it's too big, don't do it all. Do a statistically relevant sample of it, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So when data sets are really large, we'll take the data that we can within the memory footprint that gives you a really solid representation of what the entire data set would have told you anyway. Why ask the question a million times when asking it 100,000 is sufficient? Plus or minus a couple points. And we're not doing surgery here and not launching rockets. We're really just trying to give some macro objectives. So that's coming in our next release. Logical data models, as I mentioned, the data domains, heightened focus on this and even shipping some with ours to serve as the epicenter. And you can think of all the different dictionary and metadata you could wrap around this guy, like, is this PII? If I create a customer's data domain, I know a priori which attributes are PII. So anything that maps to that data domain, I've got my answer. I know it already needs to be protected in that regard. I know how I might want to view the profile or quality of the data on a per attribute basis, which are the metrics that matter most on a date field versus a name field, as an example. So on and on, there's a lot of things you can hook on to that logical model that'll drive a lot of capabilities that Cliff really needed to get through his exercise very quickly. And I mentioned before the guided stewardship, which is that virtuous cycle of completion for the classification part. All right. So, in conclusion, going back to where we started with, everyone needs data. Everyone's using data. It's changing everybody's job. We feel like it's more like water. I think the most apropos thing to say is water, water everywhere. Let's give Cliff a drink. All right, thank you.